It's now nearly 150 years since the last of the great MacCrimmon pipers died, and it's over 2 centuries since the College of Piping flourished at Borririg in Skye. Piping has changed tremendously since these days. It has spread out from the Highlands and Gaeldom, so that the average piper today can neither speak the language nor play the music of the MacCrimmons. All over the world there's an explosion of interest in the Highland bagpipe, but these anxious enthusiasts are learning to play tunes which have almost no connection with the music of the masters. And yet, although only a minority of pipers today play this pibroch, the classical bagpipe music, the increase in the number of pipers has been such that there are more pibroch players today than at any time in history. Every pibroch player, of course, also plays the light music, and indeed the ability to play marches, strathspeys and reels is looked on nowadays as an essential requirement before a person starts to learn pibroch. Altogether, the situation in piping would be most confusing to a MacCrimmon, and the object of this series of programmes is to trace the changes that have taken place in piping and in pipe music by considering the life and work of some of the key figures of the last 150 years. The first man I'd like to talk about is John Ban MacKenzie, and I think he's a suitable one to start with because he's the first great piper in history who was not taught by a MacCrimmon. John Ban was born in 1796 at Achalty, near Contin at the head of Strathpeffer. He was taught first by Donald Moore MacLennan at Moy, a relative incidentally of our D.R. MacLennan, and then by John Bake MacRae, piper to the Earl of Seaforth at Brahan Castle. We've no way of knowing now what kind of tunes he started with, but almost certainly pibroch played a big part right from the beginning. In addition, however, pipers were also by this time playing ceol peg, the little music, of no real merit compared to the majesty of ceol mor. This had been introduced by the army pipers, and some of the tunes John Ban learned would be of this type, such as this 2-part march, Allen Grange. Piping had been made illegal by the Disarming Act following the failure of the 1745 Rising, and this act was not repealed until 1782. The introduction of pipers to Highland regiments in the late 18th century encouraged the playing of the bagpipe once again, but it brought about a new kind of music. Pibroch was of little value in the army, although it could be used occasionally and was always encouraged in the officers' mess. But what was chiefly wanted from an army piper was a simple air, something which could be used to keep the time for soldiers marching along the road. The early tunes were of little musical value, and pipers must have felt a bit ridiculous playing these after being used to pibroch. But gradually the compositions improved. Pipers got used to them. Sentiment played its part, with the association of a particular tune with an event or an activity, and so this little stuff slid into the heritage of piping. John Ban Mackenzie's link with the Golden Age began when he was sent for lessons to John Mackay of Rassay. John Mackay had been taught by the last MacCrimmons, Ian Dhu and Donald Rua, and he was reckoned to be the greatest piping authority of his time. There is no doubt that he made John Ban the complete pibroch player, inspiring him perhaps with some of his own compositions such as MacLeod of Colbeck's Lament. John Bann was 29 years of age when Donald Rua MacCrimmon died, but there was no direct contact between them. In any case, the last MacCrimmons were coasting along on the family reputation, and the time had come for a change of scene, and a change of the principal teaching family was necessary if piping were to stay alive and vital. The Mackays of Rassay might have taken over, but although John's son Angus was undoubtedly the piping genius of the 19th century, his mental illness and early death finished that as a possible new hereditary line. In any case, the social and political changes in the Highlands had eliminated the whole idea of hereditary pipers. No longer was a clan the unit, with the piper occupying an honoured place. By the start of the 19th century, anyone who had the ambition to be a full-time piper had only two choices. Either he could join the army, or he could go into private service with one of the Highland landowners. John Bann, like all the best pipers, chose the second alternative. From 1819 to 1821 he was piper to MacKenzie of Allen Grange, and then for the next 12 years he was piper to Davidson of Tullach. During this time he matured to become the best piper in Scotland. The Highland Society of London competition, forerunner of the Northern Meeting in Inverness, was being held annually at that time in Edinburgh. In 1821 John Bann was placed third. In 1822 he was second, and in 1823 he won the prize pipe. And so we find him king of pipers, employed as a somewhat superior servant, sometimes playing the great music of the previous centuries, and at other times rattling out the simple little new pieces. The tune that bears his name, in fact, is one of the best of these early marches, even good enough to be heard occasionally nowadays. The march John Bann MacKenzie. Pipers were also learning at this time to play dance music on the bagpipe, and they did this usually by borrowing tunes from the fiddlers. Gradually, however, they began to compose original music too, and some of the tunes of this period have considerable merit, even if they haven't survived the test of time. John Bann's Strathspey, for example, is quite cleverly constructed, although the endings are rather weak and perhaps better suited to the fiddle than the pipe. Here it is, along with the real John MacKenzie. John Bann, Fair John, was not only the best piper, he was the handsomest man in all Scotland. According to a contemporary account, he was tall and of magnificent physique, upright in appearance as in character. No doubt many ladies loved him, but one more than most, and she was considered to be well above his station in life. She was Maria MacKenzie, the beautiful daughter of Captain Donald MacKenzie, a local laird in Applecross. Davidson of Tulloch often visited there, taking John Bann with him. It would appear that the lady made the running, but when her father discovered the budding romance, he banished John Bann from the district. Maria, however, was waiting with her luggage round the bend of the road, and she insisted on going with the piper. According to one story, they were married in Crieff. According to another, they arrived at a cottage in Contin, where a wedding was taking place, and they exchanged their vows in the kitchen while the official marriage ceremony went on in the room. This was about 1832. John Bann then left Tulloch, probably because of the difficulties which would arise through Davidson's friendship with Mackenzie of Applecross. His next and last job was with the Marquess of Breadalbane at Taymouth Castle. This must have been the greatest piping centre of the time, with the MacGregor pipers in Glenlyon to the west and the MacDougall bagpipe-making business in Aberfeldy a few miles to the east. In such surroundings, treated with respect by everybody because of his ability, because of his appearance, and no doubt also because of his wife, John Bann reached the peak of his career. In 1835, a special competition was held in Edinburgh for former first prize winners. John Bann was awarded the gold medal, and this is where the title King of Pipers arose. The winner of the prize pipe that day, incidentally, was Angus Mackay. John Bann had also started composing, and some of his music was showing signs of greatness. It's always been thought that the title of this pibroch, Mrs. Smith's Salute, puts pipers off, but the tune certainly has considerable merit. The ground of Mrs. Smith's Salute. John Bann also tried composing the light music, but without notable success. Competition marches were just being developed at this time, and it's interesting to note that at least one of his tunes could be made into a competition-type tune if it were given a modern setting. It's not a very good tune, but it shows he was influenced by the trend. And the name of it, the Princess Royal of Prussia, gives us an indication of the kind of visitors he played for at Taymouth. Here is the start of it. Although he didn't compose competition marches, John Bann undoubtedly played them and taught them. It's one of the most amazing phenomena in piping that Angus Mackay and Hugh Mackay should develop this highly complicated and interesting form of pipe music so quickly, from such simple beginnings. Even with the old way of making the embellishments, a tune like, for example, Hugh Mackay's Charles Edward Hope de Vere stands out head and shoulders above the little music of the time. Charles Edward Hope de Vere by Hugh Mackay. John Bann's day was certainly a transition period in piping, when all kinds of compositions were being thrown into the melting pot in the hope that some would survive. It seems strange to us nowadays that Charles Edward and this little tune, John Bann's Sister's Wedding, could exist side by side without the one completely overwhelming the other. The answer, I suppose, is that one was indeed eventually overwhelmed. Charles Edward is still in the top 10, but probably none of us have ever heard John Bann's Sister's Wedding before, or ever will again. In 1842, Queen Victoria met John Bann for the first time when he played for her on a boat on Loch Tay. The Queen was completely captivated by him, and she asked Breadalbane to find her a piper who was as good a player and as handsome a man as John Bann. When the message was passed on to John Bann, he replied that such a search would fail on both counts. He refused to go as the Queen's piper himself, nor would he allow his young son Donald to go. He suggested that the next best piper to himself was Angus Mackay, so Angus duly went off to London as the first piper to the Sovereign. Queen Victoria obviously never forgot John Bann, for 12 years later she presented him with a brooch to commemorate their meeting. In 1860, at the age of 65, John Bann retired from Taymouth Castle and went to live in Munlochy. His closing years were not happy ones, for 3 years later his son Donald died there of smallpox. This must have been a very sad blow, because Donald was only 30 and had given every indication of following in his father's footsteps. At the age of 15 he had won the prize pipe in Edinburgh. John Bann only survived him by 1 year, and although the cause of his death was supposed to be an injury received in a fight with a stag, the chances are he had lost the will to live. His life had been full of success and glory, and this bitterness at the end must have been quite unbearable. Although he will always be remembered for his reputation as a player, his real importance to us was as a teacher. His pupils were quite outstanding. The King of Pipers competition was held 4 times, in 1835, 1867, 1873 and 1876. John Bann won it the first time, and his pupils Donald Cameron, Ronald MacKenzie and Duncan MacDougall won it on the other occasions. Almost every first-rank piper in Scotland today can trace his teaching back to this man. Before he died, John Bann composed a really beautiful pibroch in memory of his son. We played part of the ground of it at the beginning of this programme, and here to finish is the thumb variation followed by 2 other movements from His Father's Lament for Donald Mackenzie.